In this video, we're going to go over how your existing Cantonese can help you 5x your Mandarin learning speed without having to memorize a bunch of characters, vocabulary, and tones. And you don't need to know how to read and write Chinese, Cantonese already to use this. As long as you speak at least a little bit of Cantonese, Sik Tang, Sik Gong is totally fine. You can use your Cantonese to help you learn Mandarin faster and easier. But wait, aren't Cantonese and Mandarin different languages? Like when I was younger, my tutor told me not to use my Cantonese because it only makes things more confusing. And they were right. Using your Cantonese will mess you up if you don't know what you're doing. You'll end up sounding like some Hong Kong people who, no offense, speak ultra butchered Mandarin.
呢個女人呢是電視台嘅高層，其他三個單神呢是人追就。唉，史律姐個女人呢是呢個黑社會殺手，冒充參加選美。對，謝謝幫忙，得閒飲茶，再見。
But if you know the proper way to use your Cantonese to help you, then you'll learn much faster than with the basic tutors, classes, and apps that teach Mandarin in a way that, as we all know, is catered to Guailos. But to understand how using your Cantonese can help you learn faster, we have to understand how the traditional Guailo way kind of works.
Let's look at the traditional Mandarin learning process. All right, this is what I call the Guailo way. Okay, so assuming you skip, all like the writing characters and all that stuff you do when you're in Chinese school, the general structure goes like this. First, you have to learn the grammatical structure of Chinese Mandarin. Then you got to memorize that new grammatical structure. Then you got to learn new vocabulary words. You got to memorize the new vocabulary words. Then you got to learn new pronunciation. You got to memorize those tones. And then you finally get to apply that in practice. And then you repeat from the beginning when you learn a new structure. All right, that's the general kind of traditional by the way of learning language. Now, what happens if you use your Cantonese? If you use your Cantonese, you'll see it actually becomes a lot simpler. All you have to do is learn the word mapping between Cantonese and Mandarin, learn the tone mapping between Cantonese and Mandarin, and you just apply those lessons in practice, and you repeat from the beginning. Okay? So you'll see it's a lot simpler, and I'm going to show you exactly how that works right now. So first off, let's look at how we eliminate that first step, which is learning grammatical structure and memorizing new grammatical structure.
So let's look at an example. Think of the sentence, I'm going to California next week. How would you say that in Mandarin? It's okay if you don't know. All right, I want you to think about how would you say it in Cantonese? And by the way, it's okay if you don't know the word for California in Cantonese. Just fill it with English. 我下個禮拜要去 California. Or 我下個禮拜要去加州. So the word for California in Cantonese is 加州. Now, you might not be able to read Chinese yet, but what's interesting about this sentence is that it's actually the exact same sentence grammatically in Mandarin. The only difference is the pronunciation, but you see all the characters, they're the same.
The exact same characters, word by word, in the exact same order. Because of the fact that you speak Cantonese, what that tells you is that you inherently knew the grammatical structure and order for Mandarin. You just didn't realize that it was the exact same. On the other hand, if you were learning the traditional way, like an English speaker, the Guailo way, you might notice that actually these structures are actually quite different, right? I'm going to California next week. You'll notice that the time next week is actually at the end of the sentence here. Whereas in Chinese, it goes, 我下個禮拜要去加州. The time goes after the subject, me. And so if you are going from the Guailo perspective, you actually have to learn a whole new grammatical structure when going to Mandarin, and you have to memorize that structure and learn how to apply it. Whereas because of the fact that you already speak Cantonese, all you got to do is make the sentence in Cantonese and just bring to Mandarin. And so what that means is, as we see earlier, we can eliminate learning grammatical structure and memorizing that new grammatical structure, because all we got to do is take what we already know in Cantonese, the sentences that we can already speak, and just bring that over to Mandarin, the exact same thing. And then all you got to do now is just figure out, okay, how are these words pronounced? Because that's the only difference here. The difference is the pronunciation between Cantonese and Mandarin.
So now another problem that a lot of traditional learners have when they're trying to learn the language is memorizing and learning all the different pronunciations for all the words, which can have them feeling a little bit frustrated because when they don't memorize a word properly, they have absolutely no way to figure out how to say it. So now the way your Cantonese helps you with that is let's take a look at the word ga for add. What does that become in Mandarin? It becomes the word jia. Ga becomes jia. Now let's look at another example. Let's take a look at the word ga for family. What does that become in Mandarin? You guessed it. Jia. Now let's take a look at another word. How about the word ga, fong ga, so like for vacation. What do you think that becomes in Mandarin? You guessed it. Jia. Noticing a trend here? It's because there is. Most of the time when you go from Cantonese to Mandarin, the GAA for ga becomes JIA in Mandarin. Jia. And so what that means is actually if you use our initial mapping, word mapping chart
that you get after this call, or you get after this kind of masterclass, I'll email it over to you. But you actually see that the Cantonese G becomes a Mandarin J about 80% of the time. And so what that means is you can actually, if you know what the word sounds like in Cantonese, you can actually predict what it's going to be in Mandarin.
So 我 becomes 我，下个礼拜 becomes 下个礼拜，要去 becomes 要去， and then 加州 becomes, well, first one we know 加 becomes 加, and then 州 becomes 州, so 加州，我下个礼拜要去加州。So now what this means for you is that's going to really reduce the amount of memorization you have to do because there's actually a fixed amount of mappings between Cantonese and Mandarin. And if you actually learn these mappings, as long as you know what the word sounds like in Cantonese, you can actually predict what it's going to sound like in Mandarin almost every single time. And so you can take all your Cantonese vocabulary and easily bring it over and not have to memorize and learn a whole bunch of new words.
By the way, you can get all the flowcharts by clicking on the link down below.
So now the last problem that we'll be covering today that a lot of learners face when they're trying to learn Mandarin is having to memorize the tone for every single word. For example, the word for 4 is 四. However, if you say in the wrong tone, 四, it becomes 呆, which basically means that tone is really important when it comes to speaking Chinese. And this can have a lot of people feel a little bit frustrated because they won't know if they're saying a word correctly or if they're saying it with the right tone in the first place. And it's so hard to memorize every single tone for every single word. So the way your Cantonese helps you with this is by using the tone mappings between Cantonese and Mandarin. Let's say, for example, the word for tall in Cantonese. What is it? It's pronounced go, go, go. It's not pronounced go. It's not pronounced go. It's pronounced go, right? Now, you might not be familiar with Cantonese tones, but this go is actually called tone 1 in Cantonese. And the best way to think about it is like this. Do, re, mi, fa, so. That so is tone 1. Do, re, mi, fa, so, 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 go, 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 right? Tone 1 in Cantonese. Now, we don't have time to cover all the tones in this lesson, but the interesting thing about this is that the Mandarin tone 1 is actually the exact same as the Cantonese tone 1, meaning in Mandarin, tone 1 is also do, re, mi, fa, so, so, right? That's also tone 1 in Cantonese. So given that in Cantonese it's pronounced go with tone 1, what tone do you think it uses in Mandarin? Well, it's pronounced go, go, go. And if you notice, that Mandarin tone 1, go, is actually the exact same do, re, mi, fa, so as go in Cantonese. And what this means is that the Mandarin tone 1 is actually the exact same as the Cantonese tone 1. And on top of that, they actually map to each other. And what this means is that if you have a word in Cantonese that sounds like do, re, mi, fa, so, and has that high and flat tone, right? It's going to have the exact same one in Mandarin about 90% of the time. Now, the word for California in this case is ga zao, ga zao, ga zao. So given that the Cantonese tone 1 maps the Mandarin tone 1 about 90% of the time, what do you think that is in Mandarin? That's right. Jiazhou, 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 the same tone. So what does that mean? That means that if you actually use a tone mapping chart as well, which we're going to send you an email, you can actually predict the tones for a bunch of different words. And easy to remember is if you're using the so, do, re, mi, fa, so, tone 1 in Cantonese, then we just use tone 1 in Mandarin, right? If we actually apply this mapping to other things, let's say, for example, 4, right? What's the word for 4 in Cantonese? Say, right? Say. It's not say, ya yi sam say, it's ya yi sam say, right? If your tone is flat in Cantonese, then we use tone 4 in Mandarin. So Cantonese, ya yi sam say, it's flat, right? We don't say ya yi sam say, we don't say ya yi sam say, ya yi sam say, right? If it's flat, then we use tone 4. So say becomes 四 in Mandarin. The word for die in Cantonese is say, right? Mho say, don't die. If your tone has an upward inflection, say, right? Upward inflection. Say, it's not say. It's not say, right? It's say. If your tone in Cantonese has an upward inflection, then use tone 3 in Mandarin. So, 四, right? So we can actually predict what all the tones for all these words are going to be. So what that means is by using our Cantonese to help us map to Mandarin, what that means is we've actually, 1, eliminated, figure out the grammar because it's the exact same sentence. Then we've eliminated having to memorize a bunch of words in Mandarin because we actually use the word mapping to figure out what it's going to sound like in Mandarin. Then we eliminated having to memorize what the tones for all those words are going to be because we just map the tones over. So it became a lot simpler. We eliminated that step. And now as we saw, we're just left with the easy step of applying the lessons in practice, right? So I know you're thinking, be like, whoa, Sheldon, it's not that simple. I know, for example, that Mandarin and Cantonese use different words. The word for eat in Cantonese is 食飯, but Mandarin they use 吃飯. How are you going to explain that, right? There's different characters here.
So let me give you an example. How would you say do not go out in Cantonese? Do not go out. What he said in Cantonese is 唔好出去. How do you say it in Mandarin? You might not know, but the way I say it in Mandarin is 不要出去,不要出去. And lo and behold, you're right. 唔好 is different from 不要. There are different words here. Oh, listen, that breaks the whole thing, doesn't it? It doesn't work anymore. Actually, what happens is if you actually take this Mandarin and bring that to Cantonese, you'll notice that it actually becomes 不要出去,不要出去 becomes 不要出去. Okay? Now notice between Cantonese and Mandarin, right? The Cantonese structure and the Mandarin structure, the only difference here is that the 唔好 became a 不要. Every single other thing is the exact same. And so you're right. Sometimes Cantonese and Mandarin do use different words for the same things. But it's kind of like, imagine a British person came to America and they said, oh, I want some chips. And they were like confused. And then you learn, okay, actually it's French fries here. It's quite easy for that British person to adopt the use of the word French fries once he learns it, right? And in a similar way, it's quite easy for you to just change a couple words in a sentence to make it Mandarin. It's quite easy for you to learn those different words. And we actually have a chart for it. So we'll send you that in email as well. That shows you exactly that. So it's a lot easier than having to learn a whole new sentence structure from scratch because I would like some chips and I like some French fries in the same sentence. It's just for the British person, you have to learn that chips becomes French fries in America. So in the same way, for a Cantonese speaker, they just learn, okay, when I go from Cantonese to Mandarin, or when I go from Britain to America, similar thing. When I go from Cantonese to Mandarin, I change all my 唔好 for don't into 不要 or 不要. Okay? Everything else structurally stays the same. And so it's pretty straightforward, right? Change my 唔好 to 不要, and then in Mandarin say 不要. Now what happens is when you actually use this method, once the Cantonese speaker realizes that, okay, the word for don't in Mandarin is 不要, but everything else stays the same, they can take every single expression that they've ever used 唔好 for in Cantonese and bring that all to Mandarin right away. And so that's why it's kind of like you're unlocking the Mandarin you never knew you had, as opposed to learning a whole new language from scratch. It's like a Britain person, right? The minute they learn a couple of these American terms like French fries, Subway, it's not tube, it's Subway, right? The minute they learn that, they're fine because it's fundamentally the same language, just different pronunciation, different word selection for different words, okay? And so that's how we simplify that whole process by using your Cantonese to help you. And I want to make one more point here. How does your Cantonese improve as well by doing this? Well, actually, 不要出去, right? This actual sentence structure saying 不要出去 actually exists in Cantonese as well, okay? And this is what we call formal Cantonese. This is what you'll frequently hear in, for example, the news. This is what you hear in songs. By actually learning Mandarin, Mandarin is actually just formal Cantonese, or formal Cantonese is actually just Mandarin. And so by learning Mandarin, you're actually going to improve your Cantonese because you're going to learn the exact structure of what makes up formal Cantonese. And so you can use that to participate and understand the news. Learn about more complicated Cantonese topics because really formal Cantonese is just Mandarin. Okay? So that's how you improve your Cantonese while you learn Mandarin, because you're going to be learning all those different mappings that apply to Cantonese as well.
Now, before we continue, by now you should start to understand how this method, which we call the copy and paste method for learning Mandarin, is so effective, especially in a world where it feels like the only option for us Cantonese diaspora is either some basic one-size-fits-all Guaylo class where we're learning alongside Guaylos who are complete and total beginners, or some advanced class where it's way too advanced for us. It's like, whoa. I know that Lei Ho is Ni Hao, okay? I speak Cantonese, I don't need to learn Ni Hao from scratch. But at the same time, it's like, I don't really know what level I am. And that's why if you're a Cantonese speaker and you want to get speaking conversational Mandarin in just 6 weeks, we're opening up our calendar to help you out. Not in like a basic one-size-fits-all way, but in a personalized way, where we see where you're at with your Cantonese and Mandarin, where you're trying to get to, and then give you guidance and a personalized plan to actually help you get there. And so if that's something you want to take advantage of, I recommend clicking the link in the description box down below and booking a call to speak with our team now. And we're not trying to work with everyone on this. We're looking for motivated Cantonese people who are actually trying to get speaking Mandarin and not just have it be another New Year's resolution that never happens.
Hey Sheldon.
Hi, Sheldon.
Hey Sheldon. Absolutely. I would 200% recommend your course.
Yes, I would definitely recommend Cantonese and Mandarin to someone.
I would definitely recommend the Cantonese and Mandarin to other people. Particularly helpful at people with a Cantonese background.
Because it made me realize I can learn another language while also improving my current language, like Cantonese.
I felt like this was the right resource for me to take the little Cantonese I had and catapult me into Mandarin proficiency.
We will also be giving you a quick Cantonese assessment to gauge where you're at and see what type of help you actually need. This helps us personalize a plan that's specific to you and make sure that you're not doing things that are either way too basic or way too advanced. So look, you have no risk of simply going to the link below this video and booking a call with our team to see if or how we can help. Otherwise, if all that was helpful, then click here to watch a more in-depth video on how the tone mapping between Cantonese and Mandarin works. And click here to watch a more in-depth video on how the word mapping between Cantonese and Mandarin works as well.